It was an unusually still afternoon, the kind where the house feels almost unnaturally quiet, with nothing but the sound of your own breathing breaking the silence. My son had gone out for the day with his friends, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to take advantage of this rare moment of peace and relax in my room. The sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, bathing the bed in a warm glow as I settled in with a book. However, my mind wouldn't stay focused. Before long, I set the book aside and allowed my thoughts to wander. The silence of the house felt too heavy, too empty, and a strange restlessness began to stir inside me. My thoughts drifted to things I hadn't let myself consider for a long time, ideas that were both exhilarating and forbidden. I tried to push them away, but they lingered, taunting me until I gave in. Rising from the bed, I walked over to the mirror and studied my reflection, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I was dressed casually, yet something about the way the fabric hugged my body made me feel attractive. I smoothed my hands down my sides, imagining how it might feel to have someone else's hands there, someone who would appreciate every curve and line. The thought quickened my pulse, and soon I was swept away by the fantasy. Closing my eyes, I let my imagination take over. A vision of a strong, confident man filled my mind, a man who would know exactly how to touch me and make me feel wanted. I could almost feel his hands on my skin, his breath warm against my neck, and the soft words he might whisper that would send shivers down my spine. The fantasy was so vivid that I barely registered the door opening. When I opened my eyes, reality hit me like a wave. Standing in the doorway was my son's best friend. His eyes were wide, with a mix of shock and something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. He was supposed to be out with my son, yet here he was, witnessing a moment I had never intended for anyone to see. For a few tense seconds, neither of us moved. The air between us grew thick with tension, charged with more than just embarrassment. His gaze lingered on me, traveling over my body in a way that made my breath catch. I could see the internal struggle in his expression. Part of him wanted to leave, but another part seemed rooted in place, unable to look away. I was the first to speak, my voice coming out as a soft, breathless whisper. "I didn't expect anyone to come in," I said. He swallowed hard, still standing frozen in the doorway, his hand gripping the doorknob as though it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "I thought the house was empty." The awkwardness of the situation was undeniable, but beneath it, there was the same thing present in the doorway, his hand gripping the doorknob as though it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "I thought they were gone, out of sight." My pulse raced as my thoughts scrambled for what to do or say, but all I could focus on was the way he looked at me, his eyes darkening with barely concealed desire. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It's okay," I said softly, though even I could hear the hollowness in my words. We both knew nothing about this was okay. The moment teetered on the edge of something dangerous, something that could change everything. Instead of stepping back, I found myself moving closer, drawn toward the intensity in his gaze. His breathing grew quicker, his chest rising and falling as if he was struggling to keep control. "I should go," he said, but his feet didn't move. His voice was low, almost hoarse, as though the words were difficult to say. I nodded, though I didn't want him to leave. "Maybe you should," I replied, but neither of us budged. The tension between us became almost unbearable, an invisible force pulling us closer until it felt inevitable that we would collide. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the magnetic pull in his stare that mirrored the fire burning within me. And then, as if something inside both of us snapped, he stepped forward, and suddenly we were inches apart. His hand reached out, hesitating for a moment before it touched my arm. The touch was so light, it was barely there, but it sent a shock wave through me, making me gasp. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but his hand didn't retreat. Instead, it moved slowly up my arm, leaving a trail of warmth that made my skin tingle. "I shouldn't be here," he added, but I didn't want him to stop. Though I couldn't bring myself to say the words, my body screamed for him to keep going, to close the distance between us. I looked up at him, my breaths coming in short, uneven gasps, and in that instant, everything else melted away. It was just the two of us, standing on the brink of something we couldn't undo. Without thinking, I leaned in, my body brushing against his, and that was all it took. His hand moved to my waist, pulling me closer, while his other hand cupped my face, his thumb gently brushing my cheek. The touch sent shivers through me, and I could feel his breath on my lips as the rest of the world disappeared. Then he kissed me, a hesitant kiss at first, as though unsure of what he was doing. But when I responded, kissing him back with all the pent-up desire I'd been holding in, the kiss deepened. It became urgent, demanding, and every reason why this was wrong faded into nothingness, replaced by an overwhelming need. I shook my head, afraid to speak, worried that anything I said would make things more complicated. He stepped back, his hand sliding reluctantly from my waist, as though it pained him to let go. "I should go," he repeated, and this time he moved toward the door. I watched him leave, a part of me wanting to call him back, to ask him to stay, but I knew I couldn't. What had just happened was something that couldn't happen again, no matter how much I wanted it to. The door closed softly behind him, and I was left alone in the room, my thoughts racing as the weight of what had just occurred settled over me. My heart was still pounding, my thoughts spinning wildly from what had just happened. I understood how risky this was, how it could lead to something that would change everything. Yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling of his lips on mine, the way his hands had moved over my body. I sat down on the bed, letting the moment replay in my mind again and again, knowing deep down that this wasn't the end. What had taken place in that room was a secret we would both carry, a moment that would linger between us. every time we met. A line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. The pull between us, the undeniable desire, was too strong to ignore. I realized it was only a matter of time before it would bring us together again. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I tried to act as if everything was normal, but inside, nothing felt the same. I couldn't stop thinking about him, his gaze, the way he had touched me. I knew it was wrong, but the excitement and thrill of it all were impossible to resist. Each time I saw him, the tension simmered just below the surface, impossible to ignore. Well, I was futile. The attraction was too intense, the longing too powerful. When we finally found ourselves alone again, it was as if no time had passed. The moment our eyes met, I knew it was inevitable. It was going to happen again, and neither of us could stop it. He reached for me, and I moved toward him, all thoughts of right and wrong vanishing in the heat of the moment. We came together with a primal hunger, our bodies moving as though they were made for each other. This time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. We surrendered to the passion that had been building, letting it consume us entirely. It was wild, intense, and it felt incredibly right, even as I knew it was wrong. The way he touched me, the way he made me feel. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We were completely lost in each other, in the heat and desire that seemed to drown out the rest of the world. Nothing else mattered. When it was over and we lay tangled together, the reality of what we had done began to sink in. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was something that carried weight, something with consequences that could alter both of our lives. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The weight of this situation pressed heavily on me, mingling with the lingering heat of passion. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "We've crossed a line we can't uncross." He nodded, his expression troubled. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, though his voice held more uncertainty than regret. "It just happened," I finished for him, acknowledging how easily things had spiraled out of control. He reached out, his touch gentle as he took my hand in his. The gesture was both comforting and intimate. "I don't want this to ruin anything," he said, earnestly. "I value what we have, and I don't want to lose it." I squeezed his hand, my emotions surging to the surface. "Neither do I," I said. "But we have to be careful. We need to figure out what this means for both of us." The room fell quiet, heavy with the weight of our actions and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. We both understood the potential fallout, yet we couldn't deny the deep connection that had brought us to this moment. The days that followed were an emotional whirlwind. We tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the tension between us was undeniable. Every interaction was laced with the memory of what had happened, and it was difficult to ignore how much our relationship had changed. We were navigating uncharted territory, a dynamic that was both exhilarating and daunting. There were moments when our eyes would meet, and the memory of our intimacy would flash between us, stirring a mix of longing and apprehension. Silent glances held an unspoken understanding, adding layers of complexity to our every exchange. Over time, we began to talk about what had happened and what our next steps should be. We agreed on the importance of being honest with each other, recognizing that the secrecy of what we had done could drive a wedge between us if left unaddressed. Our actions had shifted the foundation of our relationship, but we were determined not to let it break us. We made a pact to communicate openly, to share our thoughts and feelings, and to navigate this new dynamic together. We knew we had to rebuild the trust that had been tested and approach the future with care and thoughtfulness. It was a challenging emotional journey, but it brought with it unexpected rewards. Through our vulnerability and honesty, we discovered new depths to our connection, learning things about each other we hadn't known before. Though complicated, the experience ultimately brought us closer. Facing the aftermath of our actions with mutual respect and understanding strengthened the bond we shared. It became a lesson in the power of desire and the importance of communication in any relationship. While the memory of that afternoon remained vivid, serving as a reminder of the passion and complexity of human emotions, it also underscored the strength of the connection we had built. We moved forward, carrying with us the lessons we had learned and the deeper understanding of our relationship. That pivotal moment, though undeniably intense, became part of the story of who we were, marking not just a boundary we had crossed, but a reminder of the depth of the bond we continued to share.